Hi, I am Cess, and Anna has asked me to contribute to her website Anna Affliction, and I'll be talking about a female identifying person who has had an impact on my life. Now, when Anna asked me to contribute to this project, I had a lot of conflicting feelings because I feel like, at first I kind of went, oh my goodness, how am I going to choose just one person? There have been so many women who've influenced me, and a lot of them have been feminist writers because I'm a gender, sexuality, and diversity student. But a lot of them have been family members. I come from a family of strong women, and they've been friends of mine, people I've met um, through my life. But the other thought I was having was that talking about, an amazing woman who'd influenced me with her absolutely shining politics would be too easy for me. And yes, that might be problematic in itself, but anyway, it got me to thinking about setting a challenge for myself with this topic. So I want to talk to you about problematic faves and early feminist idols or women who were role models for us as baby feminists, and my role models as a baby feminist, and in particular one, Germaine Greer. I know, I know. If you're a feminist and you're watching this, you're probably rolling your eyes or you're about to close the window, and I totally understand. But just bear with me for a second because I did say problematic fave, and it's a little bit more complicated than just talking about her and her politics. So, I'm going to tell you a story, and hopefully, it's going to make things a little bit clearer for you. But before I start, I want to tell you that um, one of the things I write about as a feminist theorist and an academic is the power of memory and histories and feminist epistemology, which basically means piecing all of these histories together, and especially the ones that are lost and incomplete and have been taken from us because of the way that the patriarchy operates throughout everything, throughout our entire culture, throughout everything that you read about a woman in history that isn't written by the women themselves. Because that really impacts on those stories a lot, and it means that as feminists, it can be really hard to draw from a rich canon because there have been so many things that have got in the way of building that canon and keeping it intact. So, back to the story. So, I was 11 years old and growing up in Brisbane, Queensland, and we'd just been given a project at school. So, the project was called Night of the Notables. And what we had to do was choose an influential Australian and do an extended research project on them. So we could choose whoever we wanted to, and a lot of kids in the class were struggling to find an Australian figure. So it's funny, young girls can be undercover feminists sometimes without even knowing it. Like, all of the girls in the class were like, well, I'm going to do a girl. I want to do a girl. Um, and, they were choosing Rosa Parks and Florence Nightingale and all of these, influential women. Um, but I wanted to do something different, and I didn't want to do what the other girls were doing because we already had 5 Florence Nightingales. Like, I wasn't going to do her. So I went home and I asked my mum and I said, what do you think I should do? And she said, oh, I think you should go and ask your grandma or your nan. And I was lucky enough to grow up with my nan living in my house. So she had a flat downstairs. And I would often go down there and talk to her about lots of different things. And she would trim my nails for me and read me stories and talk about her travels through Europe. And we had an incredibly strong bond from a young age. And we still do. So I went in there and, of course, asked her about my project and said, what do you think I should do? And she said, without too much consideration, I think you should do Germaine Greer. And I asked who that was, and she said that she was an Australian feminist and an activist and someone who was really prominent in the 70s and had helped um, the women's liberation movement be what it was. And I didn't really have the language at that time as an 11-year-old to fully grasp what she was talking about, but I knew I liked the ideas and I was interested in learning more. So she handed me this giant biography. Well, she went to the library the next day, which is just down the road from where we lived, and we got out this book together, a biography on Germaine Greer. And it had this gorgeous black and white photo on the cover, I still remember it, of Germaine looking very stern and into the distance as a young woman. Um, and I think that she had her mouth open like she was, she was mid-sentence. And I thought she was so beautiful, but also so harsh and wild in a way. And I started reading this biography from start to finish, and I just fell into it. I was a big reader as a kid, and I would always become immersed in the story that I was reading. And this was a story unlike any I'd ever read. It was the first time I was introduced to any kind of feminist politics, that's for sure, but it was also the first time that I'd ever read anything about queer women, because one of the stories in the book that really stood out to me and that I hold on to as a memory today was the story of Germaine having an affair with another girl at her high school. I remember reading it and feeling this kind of stirring somewhere in the back of my mind, and feeling like it was this illicit thing that I was reading and that I shouldn't really be reading it, but not being able to stop, and also feeling really lucky and like it was this secret thing that I could have to myself and understand. And now, as a 25-year-old who is out and really comfortable with my sexuality, I think about how long that journey took me, and the fact that that was actually probably the beginning, or one of the beginnings, but because of heteronormativity and internalized homophobia and Brisbane, it took a really long time for any of those feelings to rise to the surface. The other memory that comes to mind when I think about preparing for this project was we had this other part of the assignment where we had to create a box of items that were symbolic of the person that we'd chosen. So I had a lot of little trinkets and bits and pieces, and like a scroll for Germaine's degree and that sort of thing in the box. But it was my nan's idea to include a burnt bra in the box. And I remember standing in our yard. It was late in the afternoon, so around dusk, and I remember how the garden smelled, and I remember how my nan smelled when I was standing next to her. I remember what she looked like, and she just had this very quietly concentrated look on her face as she very carefully burned holes and singed pieces of her old bra. And it was just this really beautiful, potent moment. And again, I didn't fully grasp what was so powerful about it at the time, but I felt like I was standing on the edge of something and looking down. And I felt like I was almost traveling back to the 70s, to the time of, Germaine's activism, and that I was part of it. And that I was part of it because I was standing there with my nan who'd lived through it. So it got to the night where we had to present this Night of the Notables, and we had to dress up as the person that we'd chosen. And I had a lot of fun with that because, as I said, I was just drinking in this history, and in the book that I had, there were all of these gorgeous black and white pictures of Germaine at various ages. And there was this particular one of her in a white blouse and, an A-line skirt with her hair all sort of long and wild, looking every bit the 70s hippie that she was. And I just thought I wanted to be her by this point. I was so absorbed. And I'd picked an outfit that was almost exactly like the one in the picture, and it was actually one of the first times I can remember feeling beautiful, because as an 11-year-old I was very uncomfortable in my body and in the way I looked. Which 11-year-old isn't? So I was really excited, and I got there, and I prepared all of these answers to the questions that we had to write for ourselves that the parents who'd come to the night could come around and ask us and sort of go through the items in our box and look at the posters that we made and talk to us as though we were that person. And during the night, I didn't get that many people coming up to my table. I saw the Florence Nightingales dressed in their nurses' outfits with swarms of people around their tables, and of course all of the boys had chosen various scientists and engineers and politicians, and they were having no trouble, but not many people were coming up to my table, and I didn't really get why. But, my nan came, and she seemed happy, and so did my parents, and they were proud of me and very supportive. And it got towards the end of the night, and one of the dads of one of the kids in my year sort of approached my table, and he was smirking. I remember that. I remember the look on his face. I felt instantly kind of embarrassed and uncomfortable, but that was pretty characteristic of me as a quite introverted bookworm. And he started to ask me the questions and sort of continued to smirk at my answers, but kind of nodding his head. And I was determined to get it all right, and I did, of course. I was amazing. And then it got to the end of my questions, and he said to me, "Now I have a question of my own, is that okay?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I would like to know, Cecilia, are you wearing a bra?" It's really hard to sum up the feelings I have about this memory and why its edges are so tactile and sticky for me, because I was 11, that's really fucked up. But if it was just this one time and then I lived a life unmarred by harassment and abuse and that kind of thing that so many women go through, maybe it wouldn't mean so much to me, but kind of signified the start of a long string of situations that I have been in as a young woman, as a girl, and as a young woman. And those things that we as women find really, really hard to talk about, but that we need to talk about. And I guess that was kind of the moment that everything dropped into place. It wasn't just this story that I was throwing myself into. It was the content. It was the feminism. It was this woman's strength in the face of all of these challenges that, some of which I could understand and some of which I couldn't. A lot of which I couldn't. And just the searing embarrassment of that moment. The questioning of why. I thought it was my fault. I thought it was because he thought I was stupid, or that I hadn't done a good enough job, or that I looked silly, or that my breasts looked lumpy under my white shirt. I had no idea why he'd said it, but I just knew that I felt utterly humiliated. And now I understand, obviously, why he did it. Because I've been lucky enough to continue down this path as a feminist. And part of becoming the feminist that I am today has meant shedding skins as we do. We're always on this pathway of learning. And now I've obviously had to shed the skin of Germaine as being that influential person over my politics now, because she is so problematic. And I was even talking to my nan recently on the phone, and she brought up Germaine being on a panel and was talking about it, and I felt my heart sink because I didn't want to have to tell my nan that I'd broken up with Germaine. But I thought, no, I've got to explain it. This is part of my duty. I want her to understand, and she always listens to me. So I started to say that, and she just responded, "Yes, I know. It is a shame. She hasn't come on the journey." And that's it. She hasn't come on the next wave with us, and that's why she's not somebody who I would ever reference or refer to now in any kind of work that was advocating for her views. But I think that when we have these problematic faves and we get scared because they're called out and we feel like we're being called out, so we agree and then we throw them in the bin, we lose so much of that conversation that needs to be had around why they're problematic and what happened and at which point. And I'm a big nerd. I'm a huge feminist nerd. I love delving into those histories. I love looking at the different waves and the changes in the politics and the whitewashing of early feminism and how awful that was, and how they, the feminists of that time were just able to overlook large groups of women who were going through different but extremely similar struggles. So letting go of Germaine is not that simple. It's quite fraught because it felt like letting go of this really important moment that I had with my nan and with myself. But I think that actually what that memory is about, what this feminist memory is imbued with, is my grandmother and her influence on me, and how she's opened me up to so many things, and how she continues to come on the journey with me. And that's so important. So that's what I wanted to talk about. That was the challenge I set, and I hope that I've done an okay job of explaining it to you. Thanks if you've got this far. And thanks, Anna, for asking me to be part of your project.